We mix it up.
Hello, everyone. I think the mics are on, so okay, we're ready to go. Welcome. I am Amy Kessler. I am the Director of Market Development at the Climate Action Reserve, formerly the Director of Latin America. It is a pleasure to be here with you all today. I know it's the last session of the day, so everyone's tired and almost ready for happy hour, but thanks for sticking it out here. We have an amazing panel, very happy to be with. So we have Ana Carolina Moreno. She is the Carbon Markets and Article 6 advisor for the Panamanian Ministry of Environment. Since 2020, she has been working with Mi Ambiente on various issues, such as nationally determined contributions, NDCs, the Reduce Your Footprint program, and for the last 4 years, she has directly supported the development of the national carbon market, serving as the coordinator and advisor. She led the development of the Panama Market Roadmap and currently supports the advancement of the participation requirements of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement and the development of the market's regulatory framework. Thank you, Ana, for being here. We also have Carlos Cordova. Carlos is the Director of Environmental Solutions for the Americas at S&P Global Commodity Insights, where he spearheads strategic initiatives across governments, standards bodies, and environmental programs based in Washington, D.C. and Sao Paulo, I'm just going to say. He leads the development and implementation of cutting-edge solutions for the environmental registry and meta-registry platforms, driving innovation and integrity in global carbon markets. Thank you, Carlos, for being here. And then we have Plinio Rivera. Plinio has more than 20 years of experience in nature-based solutions project development. He is the co-founder and partner of Biofilica, Silva, and Parque Tour. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, kind of.
You can correct me. Portuguese is not my second language. Spanish is, so sorry about that. He serves on the board of Brazil's NBS, Nature-Based Solutions Alliance, and is founding member of Instituto Escolas.
Escolhas.
Okay, next year. Next year, I'll I was taking Duolingo for Portuguese, so we'll see. We'll see if we get there. Who knows? So, again, I am Amy Kessler. I'm Director of Market Development at the Climate Action Reserve. There is a lot of action happening in Latin America. I think this is going to be a really exciting panel. It's a lot to cover, frankly, in one session, because there's obviously a lot of countries in Latin America. But as a regional bloc, it represents around 30% of all credits in the voluntary market, is the second largest supplier of credits in the voluntary market as a regional bloc. And there's also a lot of significant growth in compliance markets in the region. We have 3 carbon taxes at the federal level with Mexico, Colombia, and Chile. We also have 3 emission trading systems in the development in Brazil, which we'll hear more about, in Mexico as well, and in Colombia. And a number of countries are also developing national carbon market frameworks, engaging in the use of high-integrity carbon credits, and approaching the use of Article 6. So we have Paraguay and Ecuador, who both launched processes for review of methodologies. We also have Bolivia now engaging in carbon markets, kind of crazy development over the last couple of years. And of course, Panama, who launched a decree for national carbon market system last year. We'll hear more about that as well. And then we have Chile, who's not represented on our panel, but they have, I would love to hear, anyone can speak about Chile too, but they also have actually engaged in Article 6. They're one of the leaders globally in Article 6, as they have a clear procedures for the authorization of ITMOs, the International Transfer Mitigation Units, and bilateral agreements with Japan, Singapore, and Switzerland. So really a lot of action coming out of Latin America. At the Climate Action Reserve, we have been engaging with these governments over the last number of years to support them in the use of high integrity credits and the growth of their compliance markets. We worked with Panama a few years ago on the development of a forest protocol for Panama. And we're also engaging with Chile on their carbon tax, so our program can serve that carbon tax, which is at $5. And we also joined a couple weeks ago, I didn't mention this as we were chit-chatting right now about registries for Brazil, but we joined a technical consultation just a couple weeks ago on the development of the SBCE, or Brazil's greenhouse gas trading system. And of course, we worked with the governments in Mexico at the federal and state level for many years We really represent around 90% of all credits, or probably more, in Mexico's voluntary space. And we also are approved under the state programs, or state carbon taxes of Colima and Querétaro. Their taxes are quite high, actually, around $27 to $35, and they use between 20 and 50% of offsets for those carbon taxes. And the state of Colima, our projects represented around 85 of all used credits in their last compliance period. So we're really excited to be engaging with governments and stakeholders in Latin America. We're also really excited to increase our engagement even more and support more growth of high-quality protocols. You might have heard our president yesterday Robin Ricks, speak about a new protocol development process, what we're calling a modular approach. This is really to take our high-integrity protocols and streamline the upstream processes of bringing on more jurisdictions more quickly. Currently, we represent around 30% of all credits that have CCP, Core Carbon Principle label, in the world, which is really hitting above our weight because we don't represent that much in the market. So I think it speaks to the high integrity of our protocols, and what we want to do is bring that high integrity to more jurisdictions. So really, really excited to talk about Latin America here. That's my pitch. I swear I won't talk more about me, and we're going to talk more about these amazing panelists now. So I'm going to transition. Anna. Panama is at a really exciting point in the carbon market. You published, as I mentioned, the draft decree for the national carbon market system last year. I think it was November for public comment. Can you give us an update on that? And I'm going to bundle two questions. I'd love an update on that. I also, last year at NACW, we heard about the ban on forest carbon projects in Panama. I know there are a lot of stakeholders that are really anxious to hear if there's been progress on that. So please, Anna, give us an update.
Yes, thank you so much, Amy, for inviting us, and thank you for the public for being here. It's a pleasure for me to share this panel with my colleagues. Yes, we have been working on a draft on an executive decree, a new executive decree for carbon markets in Panama. Through October 2025, we had the public consultation process, but we have some steps prior to that process and post that process, so we can ensure participation and integration, representation of diverse actors and sectors in the country. In September 2025, we developed some preliminary consultation meetings directed to specific stakeholders that we needed to get more involved in the national carbon market, such as the Energy Secretariat, the Ministry for Agricultural Development, the Forestry Directorate under the Ministry of Environment, but also other actors, relevant actors from the banking sector of Panama and also the finance sector in Panama, such as the Ministry of Economic and Finance and also the Superintendency of Banks in Panama. We included some participants from the private sector and also international entities such as the World Bank. The idea of this first stage of the public consultation process was to gather information, feedback, concerns, opinion from those stakeholders so that we can include those concerns in the first draft that we were going to eventually launch for public consultation. So that was the first stage. Then we review the document. We already have like a text, but we added some of those comments and concerns there. We review it, and then we proceed to launch the public consultation formally. It went through the 8th of October to the 14th of November of 2025, but we received some requests, more than one, from those relevant stakeholders that we should extend that period. So we extended till November 30. We received a lot more feedback, and we could go deeper on some technical issues that they flagged during their review. After that extension, we also developed some bilateral meetings and 12 in-person workshops across 7 of the provinces of the country to ensure participation across the country. Then from December 2025 to February 2026, we gathered the comments. We added some of the comments in the text. And those comments that were not added, we respond directly by formal note justifying why not. And then we presented in March 26 workshop results with the decree, the new text, and also with the 218 comments received. We had approximately 300 stakeholders involved, and also 21 entities that sent comments, coming from the private sector, but we also had a lot of engagement from the public sector. The comments were mostly focused on technical definitions, such as additionality, removals, bis reduction, corresponding adjustments, and avoided emissions. We also received a lot of comments regarding free, prior, and informed consent, and also social and environmental safeguards. And finally, we also received a lot of comments regarding the governance structure of the carbon market. People wanted to know who is going to do what under the market. For now, we are in a legal review from our legal advisory office in the Ministry of Environment. Then the next step will be that same legal review, but from presidency. And then the decree is gonna go to signing and formal presentation in the webpage of the government. I must mention pretty quick the topics that we included in this new decree. We did have a decree, a previous decree, 142 decree of 2021, but this new decree is much more robust. It includes a lot of topics. For example, the institutional structure for the market, also the conformity assessment regarding the validation and verification bodies. Also, we added some complementary systems such as social and environmental safeguards, and also benefit sharing and grievance mechanisms. We also detail more about the registries and the transparency that they must have, the supply and demand of the market, and also the linkage between the international markets and the national markets. Finally, we included some principles focusing mostly on integrity, and we added a description of the activity cycles that we are expecting to have under the market. And regarding the moratorium, the ban on forestry projects is still in effect. We understand that it does have a big impact in the forestry projects that are currently in the international market, and also in those project developers that are interested in developing forestry projects. But the intention of this ban was to temporarily pause those projects to review and establish a more robust legal framework for the forestry sector. This aimed to protect communities, vulnerable communities, and to ensure that they get to receive some benefits, and also to have those safeguards needed. Mi Ambiente has been making some progress apart from the decree that I already explained to you. We have been developing a climate change framework law that is currently under review. It already went through the whole public consultation process, and it's in its legal review. It includes the carbon market topic, so we now have like a more robust base for the market at law level. And we are also working from the Ministry of Environment, led by the Forestry Directorate, a new separate law to update the forestry legal framework. This new law intends to ensure sustainable management of the forestry resources in Panama. And it's in its pre-consultation phase, so for now they are talking to relevant stakeholders. It includes topics such as carbon markets, forest carbon ownership, and specific processes and requirements for the development of forestry projects in the country.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you so much, Ana. I feel like I have a lot of follow-up questions. Some of them might be offline, but a lot of follow-up questions. But thank you. I'm going to now turn to Plinio. I mentioned Brazil is also, of course, now in the process of developing an ETS, which is very exciting news. Curious, how are things progressing on that front? And what is the outlook for carbon projects in Brazil right now? And also just whether any exciting projects you're looking forward to.
10 minutes?
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Amy. Thanks for the invitation for this panel. Good afternoon, everyone, my colleagues here. So, yes, we passed into law our law for regulated market. This was in the end of 2024. And we're now in that phase that we are figuring out the mechanics of this market. It took us pretty much since 2009 to 2024 for us to have a law. And now we do it, but when you compare it to other environmental legislations that happen in Brazil, such as the Forest Code, for example, or the law on waste management, this period of understanding and figuring out the mechanics could last as long as 10 years or more.
Wow.
So, and that's something that a lot of people outside of Brazil do not understand. And they take as for granted that, oh, now Brazil has a law and things are solved. So it's a big thing that we have a law, but I think this is right now the most important part, because that's the moment when the government, with its ministries, will decide the cap for the industries. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons that took us so long for us to have a law, from 2009 Copenhagen, I was there, to 2024, was the lobby from the high emitters that do not want carbon pricing. And those guys are still there. They're just quieter and working in Brasilia, in the lobbying. And so this is a moment where we have to pay a lot of attention, because it doesn't really matter for us to have a market if there is no appropriate cap, right? You guys know this better than us. We kind of learn a lot from experience that happens, for example, here in California. So this is one thing. The other thing that makes it even more complex from the implementation thing is this year we're going through an election, a federal election in the country. And the way that the current government is implementing the law, and I can tell you that they are doing the best they can, especially in the Ministry of Finance, not so much in the environment, more in the finance ministry, is through a secretary. And this is a very weak institution if you do change a government. And we don't know what's going to happen. Our country, maybe in that sense, similar to the US, is very divided, politically speaking. So it's depending if we do have a change, which is probable, this structure is just too weak to hold, and we basically go to phase 0. So that's a very important moment for us. The connection I want to make with this system and the VCM, or more so the nature-based solutions projects that Brazil, as most of you know, is one of the powerhouses of the world in terms of supply, is that the forums where we're now discussing methodologies, MRV, jurisdictions, all that is under this law framework. So for the first time, we do have a framework where we can meet on an organized way and discuss those things that will, in the end, even though we don't figure out the cap, this will be the infrastructure where Brazil will sell its credits abroad, rather having or not yet having a corresponding adjustment. So this regulation is important on those two themes. First, the real cap that will give us the real demand for credits in Brazil. It's for sure that part of that demand will be attended for using offsets. The magical number we talk is 20%, so it can go as high as 20%, which in our country makes sense because we want to transfer finance from the industrial sector, from the electric sector, to the nature-based sector, because that's where the gross amount of our emissions are, mostly related to deforestation, but not only deforestation, also some types of agriculture and other land use. So maybe one last comment more on this high-level view is the Brazil, as I think you all acknowledge, put a great effort in terms of making this last COP a successful COP. And we have a very clear understanding that we did the job, maybe in one of the most complex geopolitical environment of the last 15, 20 COPs. But we, and this is not a criticize, I think it was a right choice, but we basically had very low attention on the internal agendas, environmental agendas in Brazil. And I can name a bunch of them, but what is related to our panel here is that the discussions on how, for example, we're gonna finally figure out the jurisdiction approach with project level approach, that's a discussion that we've been doing for over 20 years. And we had everything to progress in the past 4 years, we did not progress at all. So we're kind of stuck in the same spot as we were maybe 4 years ago. We used too much of our energy, this is my personal opinion, on the Tropical Forest Fund Facility, the TFFFF, which, again, personally, I don't think this will go nowhere. I don't think countries are in a way to start donating money. We're in a moment we are donating money for wars, not for conservation. So I think we lost this moment from a political perspective. So we have to regain maybe twice as fast in this next political cycle. I'll stop here. I have way more to say about RED, restoration, waste management, but.
No, fantastic. Thank you very much, Flavio. I do think it's really interesting how forest projects in particular are being played out in these different jurisdictions, and how I think we all know there's such massive potential and need for investment money to drive to these forests and to the communities that steward the lands. And yet it seems like it's the biggest sticking point often. Like, it's criticized and it's challenged, and I think that there's a lot of challenges there. So I think it's really interesting how this is playing out. I want to hear more thoughts from you on that, but we'll come back. Carlos, I'm going to turn to you, and maybe we're going to talk about some more highlights, because I want to be a bit more uplifting at this point. So what are the main priorities and opportunities S&P is seeing across Latin America and the Caribbean, and where do you see the strongest momentum today? What are the key areas of work you're really focused on?
No, thank you, Amy, for the question. What we are seeing in Latin America and the Caribbean is a real shift between ambition and implementation, right? So countries are moving from discussing carbon markets to actually designing and operationalizing the markets. So the first priority that is developing is the domestic framework, right? Countries across the region are holding national carbon market systems, exploring ETS, and defining how carbon fits, within their broader economic strategy. We have examples from Brazil. We have examples from Chile, Panama, newly Paraguay, who I was just there last week, and the discussions were very fruitful. They are literally committed to evolve their markets and sell their credits, which is something that we haven't.
It's the #1 country, I would say, in South America.
Yeah, I it was great. I was very happy to be there because they're really committed to do it. They told us, we are never going to have an ETS. That's one thing, but we are going to sell things because we can sell. The only issue that they told me was, we're a small country. We need to prove to the world that we can do this. Right? So, and I'm sure they're on track to do it. As S&P, as the ecosystem of carbon markets, we want to help them to do it. The second major opportunity is around infrastructure, right? As markets grow, the focus is increasingly on how credits are issued, tracked, and transferred in a transparent way. How credits are issued, tracked, and transferred in a transparent way. We're seeing a strong demand for registry systems and solutions that ensure traceability and prevent double counting and create trust in the system. So that's an important infrastructure technology that every country should have for them to be able to be credible. Just as the conversations with Paraguay were, like, how we can make our system more credible with a clear infrastructure and system. The third point is convergence, right? So voluntary markets, compliance systems, Article 6 are becoming more interconnected. So Latin America is particularly well positioned because it's already plays a major role in supplying high quality credits globally. So the opportunity is not just grow in volume, but is building markets that are credible, connected, and scalable over time. I think that will resume how Latin America is doing right now, in my opinion, and how we have been working on these markets.
Very nice, Carlos. So I hope you all have been uplifted, because now I want to hear about the barriers and how do we actually, there are these challenges. How do we get there? How can we actually scale it up then? And what can perhaps governments like in Panama do to really support those efforts?
The opportunity in the region is very real, but scaling carbon markets requires the right enabling conditions, and that is where we see some important gaps, right? One of them, and I think I had to write it down because I want to make sure I portray this clear, is policy clarity, right? Market participants need to understand how credits will be treated, how they align with national targets, and how they connect to international mechanisms. The second one is institutional readiness, right? Carbon market cut across multiple ministries, and coordination is often more complex than expected. And I'm sure could tell about that because it's a coordination with Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Environment, and sometimes those do not interconnect with each other. The third one is infrastructure, right? Many countries are still developing registry systems or defining how credits will be tracked and authorized, especially in the context of Article 6. So without that infrastructure, it's very difficult to scale those markets and weigh a building of trust that is very needed for buyers to do. Now, what governments can do? So that's like the biggest picture there. Provide clear and stable policy signals, strengthened institutional coordination, invest early in registry and digital infrastructure, and ensure alignment with international frameworks. I mean, this could be very easy to say, but it takes a lot of work in doing it. And importantly, design systems that are built not in isolation, but can connect to the broader global market over time. Because without that, we have Singapore signing bilateral agreements everywhere. But then, if those countries that have signed with Singapore don't have the technical infrastructure to be able to deliver, then we just have a marketing advertisement. So that is needed. So those are my biggest point. So if those elements come together, I think the region has everything that is needed to become a leading force in global carbon markets. And that's what we all want to see in there.
Absolutely. I think you touched on, I also want to say, you said one of the magic words. I feel like I play a game at these conferences, like who says convergence first, who says interoperability first, or like high integrity. So you won. You said convergence first, thank you. You also touched on global markets, the need for governments to support efforts to scale and utilize these international markets. So Anna, I want to turn to you to kind of touch upon that from your perspective. There is a lot going on in the international geopolitical scale of things. How is Panama viewing international markets and particularly Article 6 CORSIA engagement?
Yes, I just wanted to add from what Carlos mentioned that those barriers resonate a lot with what we have been doing with the ministry. First of all, you will need the policies because with the policies, then you can engage other ministries. Because in Panama's experience, in the technical market team from Panama, we cannot engage them since they have their own priorities. So you need like a higher mandate for them to start operating in the same direction that the carbon market team is intending to do. But getting back to your question, Amy, yes, one of the key reasons why we review the past carbon markets decree and we are developing a new one is because we wanted to include the interaction between the national market with international markets. The first decree was from 2021, but now we are in 2026 and we have a lot of progress in international markets and a lot more of mandates. And if Panama is intending to implement international markets in their national territory, we have to include it in our framework. So the new decree includes a couple of sections directly talking about international markets. In the definitions of the decree, we included some definitions that are very relevant for international markets, such as corresponding adjustments, double counting, internationally transfer and mitigation outcomes, or ITMOs, international registry under the UNFCCC of Article 6.2, and also the PACAM for Article 6.4. Also, the new decree recognition the international existing markets, such as the voluntary carbon market, also the international compliance markets, such as CORSIA, but also the market mechanisms under Article 6. And the decree recognition those markets as part of the scope of the national market, of the whole system of market in Panama. We also distinguish in the decree the mitigation results classified by their use. Domestic use for those results that we're going to use towards meeting our NDC targets that won't need corresponding adjustments or authorization. And those mitigation results that are going to be used for international transfer that will need, in fact, corresponding adjustments. The decree also designates Mi Ambiente as the governing entity regarding all the topics related to international and national carbon markets, and also the entity in charge of the approval and authorization processes, and also in charge of the reporting and accountability obligations. We also designate Mi Ambiente as the national designated authority under 6.4 and the focal point for all the topics under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. The decree includes also a mandatory registration for carbon projects. If anybody in the country wants to develop a project, it doesn't matter if the project is intended to go to the voluntary carbon market or Article 6 or CORSIA or to stay in the country, they will have to register themselves, the project, in the national registry so that we as Mi Ambiente can track what is happening regarding climate action and where those actions are going to outside Panama. We also included the linkage to the international registry under UNFCCC for Article 6.2. We're going to use the international registry for the tracking of ITMOs. In the decree, we also recognize the methodologies that are already approved by CORSIA and the PACAM as eligible methodologies for the national market. It's important to mention that the decree focuses on administrative processes. We understand that we still need to work on more specific regulations. The decree touched base, but in a general manner, now we have to develop some more specific guidelines, specifically for sectors' participation in the market. In parallel, apart from the decree, we are working on the transition from the Clean Development Mechanism to Article 6.4. We do have just 6 projects that are intending to transition from the CDM to 6.4. We already approved 5 of them, and we are working on the last one. And we have 4 projects that send their prior consent for the Article 6.4 mechanism. We also signed in 2025 a Memorandum of Understanding with the government of Korea for cooperation under Article 6. to promote investment, the development of mitigation projects, and to achieve mitigation targets in both countries. In 2025, we also presented the Nature Pledge. It's a document that compiles targets in biodiversity, desertification, and also in climate change. It includes the NDC 3.0 that have one cross-cutting target for the energy, agriculture, waste, and industrial processes sectors, and another separate target for the forestry sector. So now we are in the process of analyzing those targets, quantifying those targets to understand what we have for markets, what should stay in the country to meet those targets, and what can we transfer internationally, which are the opportunities there. We are also, recently we launched the pilot phase of our national registry. For now, we are in a pilot phase. We are receiving feedback from the project developers that have already pre-registered themselves in the registry. But the idea is to receive that feedback and make adjustments if needed to eventually launch officially the registry. We are waiting for the decree to be ready and formalized, and then to launch that registry. But we are making progress in the pilot phase. And lastly, we are working with a couple of consultancies, one for the development of marginal abatement cost curves we didn't have, but that will help us to prioritize activities and sectors for the market. And we're also working in the development of carbon markets and Article 6 strategy, national strategy, and sectoral guidelines to help us with the next steps once the decree is formally published.
I love having Ana on this panel because Panama is doing so much. You're doing the most, and it's amazing. So thank you very much. I do want to clarify one thing. So you will be issuing letters of authorization,
Yes, not now, but the idea is yes, that the Ministry of Environment is the entity in charge of that.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Amy, if I would just say one thing, Ana talks about policy, Plinio talks about projects. That's why infrastructure is so critical to have. Mm-hmm. Without that, without these three components, the market will not evolve.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to highlight that.
But you're missing demand.
That's another thing. Aha.
That's where the government can play in
first.
as well, if we have a compliance market, or of course in the voluntary space, yes. But then I'm going to ask Ana the question that Carlos is probably on your mind, unless you already know it, which is who then developed your registry?
The registry? Well, we are developing the registry inside the Ministry of Environment.
Wow, okay.
But I must say, of course, we don't have the tools to have like a, that fancy registry. We're working for now with a basic registry. The idea is that the project developers can add information, general information on their projects, so that we can track those projects. But we do not have those fancy, registries. It's a very basic one, but it works for us to keep the track of what is happening.
Nice, that's great. Plinio, I'd love to turn back to you now and here as well. Work in Brazil, thinking of engagement with international markets, Corsia, Article 6, what is the prospect there? And as a project developer then, how are you approaching those potential markets?
Well, to be honest, we're still approaching as a potential market.
Yeah, fair enough.
Because that's the reality. It's still a potential market, and it's not a market in itself yet. And it's funny because I've been here in Corsia here for 3 days now. It's almost like we're not having anything happening in the Middle East right now.
Yes.
As if we're not even considering the price of the fuel for jets, planes. And so there's nothing much. I mean, we can do lobbying, we can engage in conference like this, we can try to understand, but again, if you're looking for funding for a real project on the ground where you need to do certain capex or whatever you need to do to protect or restore that forest in this case, it's very hard to explain that as a potential market. There are some moments where these things happen, and then you see some investment funds throwing money around, but nowadays this is I don't see this as the major demand-driven incentive for investors. it might sound a little different from, at least from what I've been hearing here, but in Brazil, my experience is that investors are still driven more towards voluntary purchasing. People who knows how to do the math in terms of the cap. I like the cap and invest now and not cap and trade. This is something I'm taking it back to Brazil.
Nice.
That's a really good marketing approach if you want to regulate. So, but we still call cap and trade. But if you do the math, and if you consider the amount of nature-based solutions that you can use as offsets, that's not much. That's not a big demand, internal demand for Brazil. So to be honest, I don't see any developer right now investing in projects in order to supply our own regulated market. I don't see this happening. I'm seeing Paulo here. Paulo is probably one of the largest waste management companies in the country, huge carbon portfolio, and I don't see them doing that either. But everybody's looking attention to that discussion, these regulatory discussions now, because this kind of will say what methodology and what activity will be eligible for, again, for domestic, but using that infrastructure to sell abroad. And in Brazil, like what we as investors and developers, what we are always aiming is an international market, that's for sure. So maybe I'm not on the positive side this time. I'm usually more optimistic, but I'm very worried with the whole multilateral agreement. I think, we're seeing what's happening. I mean, it's very hard to believe, even though I've been in 16 COPs. I helped a lot my government last year to have a successful COP, and we did. But it's very hard to find incentive coming from there. What I'm believing more, and this is, I think, why we're here. We have a big delegation of Brazilians in this conference. Is I think the way is through bilateral agreements. I think Brazil and the U.S., for instance, has a long history of doing business in multiple commodities markets. As S&P, you know that. And I think this type of bilateral agreement, but we then need the protocols, right? We need the standards, we need the methodologies, and the reality is, and now I'll take this back to the forestry sector where I'm mostly working on. After all these REDD+ crises that we are still in terms of reputation and integrity, we weren't really successful in offering an alternative for that. So what really happened was, yes, we got rid of the bad projects, but the good projects are going downriver as well. Like, that's the reality that is happening in Brazil right now, Oh, okay, so we get out of the bad guys, but all the good ones are going down as well. And this is very bad for a market that wants to sustain and get speed and not delayed. And then one extra point, maybe I bring now the more positive side, that what's happening there is, even to my surprise, a very large amount of attention and real investment on removal credits. Yes. And this is more clear in the specifics of the restoration, the ARR projects. I've never seen this. This is unreal what's happening in the past 2 years. We have companies that were startups just a few months ago that have raised a few billion reais, so almost $1 billion. And that's not only one company. We just had 2 national forest concessions for restoration, one on a state level in Pará, one on a federal level just last week at B3 on a national forest. So this is an industry that Brazil has a great potential, and this can be firstly financed through carbon finance, but it's one of those industries that doesn't really need finance throughout the time, because the bioeconomy that you transform into jobs, into those forests, the level of products and service, including water, biodiversity, and other environmental service, could be sustained in the future as well. So that's something very positive that's happening. There's a level of alignment in terms of policy and funding from public funding, because as all heavy capex industry, you need public funding for that, at least on the rates that you need to raise money for. So this is happening a lot. I'm personally involved in this company, Silva. We just announced it like 2 weeks ago, our first round of investment, kind of a Series A. Silva is a marketplace between restorations, ARR developers, and nurseries. What happens in Brazil, we have hundreds of nurseries across the country. And with all respect, Panama is doing a lot, but Panama is probably the size, a third of the size of Acre.
That's why it's even more impressive, frankly.
Which is like 5% of the Amazon. We're talking, you know, people don't realize that, but the Amazon, I like to say this in the US, Brazil owns around half of it, of the Amazon basin. But if you take the Amazon basin, which spreads out in 9 different South American countries, it's larger than continental United States. If you take Alaska out, the Amazon basin is larger than continental United States. And that's something that people don't really realize because of the maps we see. Mm-hmm. They turn to, you know, the areas go larger in the northern hemisphere. But so it's, but in ARR, you have different biomes in Brazil, and you have nurseries that are owned by, mostly by poor families on the rural areas, mostly not only owned, but managed by women. It's one of those sectors that women, they're just much better than men in dealing with the seedlings. The seedlings. So Silva works as this marketplace connecting these big developers, because this is big money, companies that have been invested by big, larger investment funds, and the nurseries that lack capacity, technology. So we invest in those nurseries and we connect as a marketplace. And in many cases, we're selling more than 100 species per hectare, because it's such a biodiversity country that you need literally hundreds and hundreds of species across all the biomes. And the only way you can supply that is using the capacity that already exists in the territory. But it existed beforehand, not for carbon market, for other types of forestry. And now carbon markets are driving this industry to a much, much larger level that we've ever saw. So that's one of the cool things that are happening there.
That's very exciting. I do think and that the power of carbon markets is exactly that. It can catalyze financing in so many different ways and innovate industries, bring new jobs. It's such a critical tool. And I think, you know, the example of Red you brought, just threw the baby out with the bathwater. They're like completely and lost focus on how powerful and important carbon markets are. It is the most efficient tool we have to reduce emissions and deliver upon other incredible benefits, jobs, incorporating indigenous peoples and communities, and so many, many, you know, ecosystem services, et cetera, et cetera. We could talk forever, but it's like there was just this focus that it just lost the story.
You know, I watched Mr. Sanders' speech yesterday. I don't know who was here. He has been a good, important role for us. I remember taking him to Brazil 15 years ago in one of our board meetings at Biofílica, and him yesterday saying that we don't need to get 100% right. I think this is so important that we all take back home, like, because all the criticism that I get, like in 20 years entrepreneuring in all these new markets, when we created the company, there wasn't even a methodology for South America, you know, like we literally sat there and started drafting what became 0015 in Vera. And all the criticism is always, why don't you get 100%? Why don't you get 100%? But the sad reality is that the people we are fighting against like the illegal loggers, the illegal miners, the illegal cattle ranchers, and nothing against cattle ranchers. The problem is that those guys are definitely not getting the 100%. You know, the contrary, they're getting like minus 80%, and they're totally succeeding in terms of Like I was having dinner with a friend of mine, Murilo is here yesterday, and his family owns a large extent of Amazonian forest, and the price of the land increased 5 times when you deforest it. In one day, 5 times. So you have a hectare that costs 10,000 reais, it turns into 50,000 reais in the next day just because you took it out. And you don't even need to sell the wood or anything, you just burn it completely. The more you burn, the better. And you can get 5 times the next day. So this kind of competition, this kind of, and then you hear all this, oh, let's get 100% right. Let's do permanence for 100 years. That's the most insane thing. I mean, guys, come on. We can be 100 years discussing how we're going to get permanence for 100 years, but we'll never reach a consensus on what is permanence. If we get permanence for 20 years in deforestation, if you take only Brazil, it's still, I mean, we have to celebrate. This government has really, from a command and control perspective, we know how to do it. We did it twice. We just did it twice. But we're still on a level of 1 million hectares per year being deforested. If you take Amazon and Cerrado, 1 million hectares. That's half a gigaton per year. So if we just manage to give permanence for 20 years, and if we avoid 20 million hectares, we talk about 10 gigaton. In 20 years from now, we figured out what to do for the next 80 years, but we already avoided all this amount of carbon, but not only the carbon, the biodiversity, the water, the rain formation. The Amazon forest for us is our water bomb. If there is a point there that we won't have water for our energy system or for our cattle ranching or for our soybean production. We don't know how close we are to this tip. Yeah. Scientists are telling us that, some scientists are now telling us that maybe we just pass it in certain areas. So we don't have to get 100% right. And we have to stop, we have to face, especially media and all the hypercritical criticism that, why don't you get 100%? The basic to start a RED plus a conservation project, the basic day one is you realize there's a big problem there. If that forest exists, that's because it's problematic all around it, because it will be much easier to just take it down and value it 5 times. So there is problem of land tenure, there's problem of violence, there's all sorts of problems. And if you go there and say, oh, you have a bad rating because you have too many problems, you're not even understanding what you're doing there in the first place. Right. And this is the kind of things that I sometimes get frustrated because you see the ratings, you see all these people trying to get the 100%, and sometimes we kind of forget the basics of conservation.
But you make a good point, and I'm glad you mentioned that people are trying to reach 100%, right? But who gets close to 100% are the co-benefits, right? These states or communities that are very forgotten in the Amazon, that because of those projects that may not be getting 100% rating, they're getting road access, they're getting schools, they're getting communities that they didn't have before. So that's also important to highlight, because this is something that comes with the credits and comes with the co-benefits for those communities that otherwise will not have. Yeah. But yes, we need to get to 100%. Yes, can we get it? It's a little bit of.
I think that's right. I think we've let perfection be the enemy of the good, without a doubt. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to act. We need to act quickly. I said at the beginning that I wasn't going to give another plug for the reserve, but I am, because permanence. The reserve has had the stance of 100-year permanence since the dawn of days. And we have launched a work group beginning of last year. It's still undergoing to assess exactly this. Because frankly, there are new mechanisms in place that can be used to better ensure permanence. And there are perhaps other considerations for what is permanence. What are we actually talking about? Is it 100 years, is that even enough? Or is it 10,000 years? Or is it 40 years? Or why don't we actually just be transparent about what we're talking about and call it durability, and have the mechanisms in place to say how long we can ensure things for a certain amount of time, utilize trust for additional time, utilize new tools like DMRV to continue monitoring.
Financial tools.
Financial tools. There are other instruments.
There are no financial tools for 100 years, right?
Yeah, no. So we have to think about these things differently. We are running out of time. This has been such a fantastic conversation, but I do want to open the floor to questions. So I think we have time for maybe one or, yeah, let's see who has a really good question. Excellent. I think she's going to give you a mic, so thank you.
Hey, so for the past 3 years, 4 years, the big word is removals. People are talking about removals, rock weathering, carbon sequestration, and there's a lot of money. People are raising billions of dollars for 20, 30 tons a year for removals. And there's kind of, I call it financial leakage, because people are forgetting about avoidance. So money is going to removals for a very, very small carbon tons a year, where avoidance is completely being forgotten, especially in Latin America, and you got 1 gigaton a year of deforestation. How do you see that changing, and is there any good perspective for avoidance on the next few years?
I think he asked it for me, this one.
Yeah, I think so too.
I know him. You're right, Murilo. There has been a shift to avoidance, and I think this shift is simply because we miss it out in REDD+. I think you know, it was an easy turn to companies to go, oh, I don't want REDD+, because this is too risky, or the community is there or is not there, whatever you want to use it community for, like integrity, and then companies were just, oh, let's do AR. But I'm starting to realize that most of those companies, they haven't done the math. They haven't done the math, because, I mean, the price difference is not related to quality. I mean, when I see comparisons, oh, AR is 30, REDD+ is 5 or 10, that you're not comparing the same thing, simply because you need thousands of dollars per hectare, or thousands of reais, in order to build a forest. So you need at least to pay for that capex in the price. And in some cases, companies are acquiring land, or in some cases they are paying land lease to the landowner. So there's a cost component there that you don't see in, for instance, in avoidance projects related to forest, or at least a much lower cost. But I think in your point, I mean, we need all the solutions, right? We need all the solutions. But if we are doing, and this is happening, and if we are to invest those billions of dollars in removal nature-based solutions, at least we have to do it in the right location. What we don't want to have is us putting these billions of dollars into trees in areas that are either competing with other commodities, or in areas that are not the best areas from an ecological perspective. And this kind of zoning, I'm not really seeing happening, you know? I think there are discussions, but the market is taking very opportunistic approach in terms of where can I buy a cheaper land, or this type of things. And we might be, you know, literally putting billions of dollars into a nature-based solution, not in the appropriate sites. Or in the case of Brazil, we have a law where areas near the water, they need to be permanently protected. This is in our national law. And we have, this is formal numbers in our NDC, we have 12 million hectares of those land that has been degraded. So why don't we put all this AR money in those lands? Because they don't compete with cattle, they don't compete with soybeans, they don't compete with forestry, planted forest. And they secure water, which is, for us, climate change is affecting our country mostly through water. That's our main, on the both sides, on very dry sometimes, and a lot of rain that kills a lot of people. Yeah. So I think this kind of zoning, that's when policy needs to come, you know, like, so if you're regulating what are the methodologies that we'll be using in our own cap and trade, cap and invest system, or internationally, let's, you know, accept protocols that take this type of knowledge in consideration, so you can direct investment where it's mostly needed from an ecological perspective, from a climate perspective.
I can't help but do one more plug, I'm sorry. So that is exactly why you have to have methodologies that also take into consideration the local context. And that is, of course, what the Climate Action Reserve we do, is we build methodologies that are incorporating that context and assess the legal frameworks and make sure that the money is being driven into the right appropriate places. So thank you so very much. Carlos, Anna, any last words from you?
No, just one more thing that I wanted to insert is, we discussed a lot about here today, and I'm sure this is a discussion for a different panel, but the fact of the deeds and the titling of the carbon projects.
Yes.
It's a whole different thing that needs to be addressed, right? And now, do we look at this is the responsibility of a registry, this is the responsibility of a standard, this is the responsibility of a project developer. It's a whole new open worms that can
It's not so new. We're trying to figure it out.
We're trying to figure out, and we are too, as SMP, where
we haven't found the answer, but it's not a new question.
so this is something that also put in the context, because it's something that also needs to be addressed.
It does, it does. And I think it's been mentioned a couple of times. I'm going to try and say a word in French. I'm going to fail. But there's, of course, the international work being undertaken by UNIDROIT. It's establishing the legal framework for property rights, and I think that's a place to be looking at. All right, thank you so very much. I really appreciate it. It's been wonderful, and thank you all. Off to the, I think, conference reception. So excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.